So, last time, going back to the actual topic that I was going to talk to, a rationalist and a foundationalist, and he's trying to ground knowledge. This is epistemology that I'm coming from. I mean, these philosophers spoke into other things, but if I'm talking about my journey, when I first encountered Descartes and Hume, the questions that I was looking for answers for were questions of what is truth and can we know it? And if so, if we can, how? And the reasons I had, the reasons I was interested in that were because I was I was struggling. I grew up in a very good Christian family, and I had a lot of people telling me that they knew the truth and they knew what it was, and I couldn't. I always struggled with what I was being told, but I also had this concern that, well, I'm being told that this is the truth, but if I had been born in Iran or India or somewhere, almost certainly I would have been told something else, Hinduism or Islam or Buddhism, or they would have been saying that that was the truth, and also that within Christianity you've got Protestant versus Catholic, and then within each of those branches there's all sort of sub branches. So there was a lot of stuff going around in my mind, and I was not at peace. And I had, on one hand, I had some people who were just saying, why do you worry about this stuff? It's all a load of nonsense, just get on with your life. And then I had another group of people that were very concerned for me because I was dabbling in things that were potentially heretical. So it was a real issue for me. And so when I found these this stuff, philosophy, where they were talking about this, I found people who actually they really bought into and thought that these things mattered, instead of, what a lot of rubbish, and or just get on with it or something. So I found myself intrigued, well, not more than intrigued, engrossed by this stuff. So I went, and here we have rationalism, and we have a priori knowledge, and in a priori the word prior is in there, and it's knowledge before things happen. So Descartes is making a claim that we can know things before they happen if we use the right method, and his methods are really what's become science, and it's mathematics and logic, and these things will remain, like, if these methods are reliable. When I read that, though, and Descartes got to his point where he was saying that he knows he exists because he thinks, the cogito, I think, therefore I am. I think, so I exist. The way out of that for Descartes was to say that there was a God, and that God was good, and we couldn't doubt that God was. And I didn't find that a convincing argument. Well, in the introductions, as well as in my thinking and whatever, you just, bam, it goes across to Locke, Berkeley and Hume. So we have the empiricists who say everything we know through experience, and we're born, and John Locke said that we're born with our mind a tabula rasa, a clean slate. Tabula, it's a table, or is the tablet or a slate, and raso is it's clean, so an empty slate. And so I think of the empiricists, Berkeley is absolutely fascinating, and I'll do another, I'll look at Berkeley separately, but I'll probably come back to Berkeley. But Hume, he was, I think he was 1711, I think he was born, something like that. And he died at 60 when he was 65. So he's after Descartes lived, but Descartes, his influence would be massive. And Hume is, I think, responding to Descartes' attempts at justifying knowledge of truth. And Hume is going, well, not so fast. And he questions the idea of the cogito, he basically in his thinking, he's or the way he's talking about stuff, he's saying, well, we just don't know until it's happened. And he is very consistent with that. He started off with accepting that, and then he was rigorously consistent with himself, leading to some interesting and probably controversial or counterintuitive positions. But he got to those positions by being consistent with his premise. So he says that there is no self that exists in time or through time. He said, whenever I look into myself, I see just a series of experiences, of moments. I do wonder who it is that's looking into himself when he says that. It does seem that there's some sense of self that is the position he's starting to look back at himself from. But for me, this dialogue that I've just realised I may have misunderstood one of the characters or where they were coming from, was just so dramatic for me. I mean, I remember when I first was reading about Hume and I encountered his thinking for the first time. I was reading it was, again, at this point I hadn't actually started reading the philosophers themselves, but there was a book where they had interviews with people that were authorities on various thinkers, and there was someone talking about Hume, and that's the first time I actually encountered him, or at least that I remember encountering him. And I was sitting in a waiting room reading this book while I was waiting for an appointment for something, and as I sat there, it was one of those moments when I got completely lost in this book. It was just, and what he was saying, or the person was saying about Hume, was just saying, he denied that we know what cause is. He says we know that something happened and then something else happened after it, and this happens over and over again, but we don't know what the cause is itself. We don't know. We know the first event, we know the second event, but we don't understand the connection, and denied knowledge of that. And whether you agree with him or not, that was the first time that anyone had ever said, I'd read anything that talked about that. And that's really, imagine talking about that, and does it make sense? Is it a reasonable claim to make? And it was incredible. Some big things that are always emphasised around Hume is he talked about the is-ought fallacy. Just because something is doesn't mean that it ought to be. So a lot of times people will argue for a position or against something, and they say, look, this is how it is, and it's how it always has been. And he said, well, just because it always has been or it is doesn't mean it ought to be. They're two different things. And I think that there's, that one's a pretty powerful insight when you realise that maybe we can do things differently to what we have in the past. Just because we always have and it is doesn't mean it ought to be. But the particular dialogue that I was thinking about and questioning ChatGPT, because I thought I had it all sorted when I talked in my last one, was dialogues concerning natural religion. And it's these three people, and they're having discussion around the existence of God. And Philo puts forward a very strong skeptical position. He's saying, we because we have to use our fallacious senses, because we have to, we see through our eyes and hear, and everything goes through and is mediated and then interpreted by us. Now, back in the mid 1700s, they didn't have the sort of understanding of the brain that we do now, but they could see that we were using our senses, and that these senses, and if you're an empiricist, that's all you have. Descartes is saying, well, we've got logic and we've got prior knowledge that we're born with, and Hume's saying, no, we don't. So what's the consequence of that? Well, we are kind of trapped inside. It's called internalism in philosophy of mind. We're trapped inside of ourselves, and we have to mediate out through our senses and back in through our senses into the world. Externalism, or reliabilism is one version of it, says that somehow we are actually out and part of the world. Whereas internalism, and internalism was kind of where people were at this stage, says we're stuck inside of our head. Certainly where Hume was at least it seems that way to me. So there's this very powerful argument that we don't know anything, and we're trapped inside of our senses, and we really don't even understand the beginnings of the world. But then a fellow says, but thankfully we have God. And he's sort of coming back to Descartes, where he's saying, if we didn't have God revealing this truth to us, and that God wasn't reliable, we'd know nothing. But at least, and this is why I think his argument is, because Philo is kind of, in a way, putting forward Descartes' argument that because we have God, we can know. And Cleanthes, and I kind of took it when I read it, I thought that Hume was really aligning or sympathetic to Cleanthes' position just because of everything else I was familiar with. And that may or may not be the case. He was using these three characters to explore something that he thought was interesting. But Cleanthes comes back and he says, oh, yes, you skeptics, you're an interesting lot. And we'll find out at the end of this, when company breaks up, how serious you are, how consistent you are with what you claim. We'll see whether you walk out through the door or out through a window. Or rather, I think he's implying, or you try and walk through the wall. We see as you go down the stairs whether you take care, because maybe you'll fall and hurt yourself. Because if you really believe what you say you believe, or at least you believe we can't know what you say we can't know, you're not going to bother us for long. In their day, it's like is that a horse? Does it exist? Is it real? Am I in the world? Is it just, and then, well, the horse has its way. And in our turn, is that a car? Does it have inertia, and can we know? So the way I looked at it, though, whether it's right or wrong, I'm not 100% sure. I thought I was pretty confident about it, and I've run these ideas past some fairly good philosophers, professional philosophers, and none of them said, no, you're wacko, mate, that's not what he's talking about. But what I took from it was that Hume was basically, and this does seem, in a broader sense, this seems to be what Hume was saying in a lot of these things is, okay, I acknowledge all these doubts that you have, and I think they're reasonable and rational. But at the end of the day, if you try to live your life in line with those things, it's not going to be a long life. And so, even though, okay, we don't know what's going to be happening in the next day, let alone, next second even. At any moment, something could happen, and it could be completely, I don't know, a meteor might smash into the earth or something even more radical than that. I don't know. There might be something that is totally out of our knowledge. An evil demon may just decide to come and destroy everything. But from a point of view of actually getting on with your life, you can't live as if that's the case. And so I take that as a pragmatic response of and I really bought into that, and I still, to a large extent, do. Ludwig Wittgenstein put more flesh on these bones for me, but let's not jump ahead too far. But with Hume, um, what I took from it, and whether that was what Hume intended to be taken from it, I don't know. But what I took from it was that even though I couldn't know, and I was struggling with that idea that I can't know, but even though I can't know, I can't live my life as if I don't know. And it gave me the beginnings of an answer. I think in the last one I talked about how I was sitting on a lathe, large computer-driven lathe, reading while it was cutting, and then I'd find myself reading this stuff, and I was like Descartes' cogito and his meditations and various other things, and really doubting all sorts of things. You know, oh, am I a brain in a vat? Am I, you know, is there some evil demon or whatever trying to deceive me? Or all these things. I'm there, and then I'd hear something on the machine, and I go, "Hang on, that doesn't look right," and I'd go and investigate, and I'd, blink of an eye, I'd change, and I had none of these doubts. I wasn't thinking evil demons were causing a taper on the bearing size of the shaft I was machining. I was looking for flexure or, something heating up or. So, it was a wrench every time. I had this sort of wrench that it tore me a bit, and I thought, when I encountered Hume, the way I moved to the place I moved to then, which I found very helpful, was just a pragmatic thing of, yeah, all of that stuff might be true, but right now, right here, right now, pragmatically, if I want to get paid at the end of the day and I want to give myself the best chance of having a job tomorrow, I won't go speculating about, if I went to my boss and said, "I'm sorry, there's a taper on that bearing size, but there's nothing I can do about it because I think an evil demon made it happen, and I can't defy that," I don't know that he would have employed me for very long. So from the pragmatic point of view, I was able to just say, well, maybe I do have these doubts. Maybe these things are concerning me. But a lot of the time, in fact, most of the time, those doubts didn't serve me at all. And what served me was to just act in the circumstance and the situation, assuming that cars can kill you and machines can, have tapers on sizes if the job's flexing or the tip's broken or something like that. So it helped me to settle my mind when I read this stuff about that. I mean, I didn't find it a deeply fulfilling answer, but at least it was something to hold a place in my thinking. And it allowed me, as I was reading this sort of stuff, and I actually asked my wife about how she thought it was for me, and I was losing a lot of nights' sleep worrying about this sort of stuff. And I think when I began to encounter particularly Hume, I just got to a point where, well, okay, I can't know. Okay, that's all right, but it doesn't mean that I have to live a meaningless life. It doesn't mean I look at where I'm at and I think, well, if I try to be a good dad and a good husband and a good employee and I pay my bills, my life, I'm giving myself the best chance. And if there are certain things that if I choose to be, have integrity and be reliable and so forth, I think that's probably, and a lot of that stuff came to me through the stuff that I heard in Sunday school and whatever, So I didn't feel any need to dramatically walk away from the life lessons and to doubt that there were ways of living my life that were more constructive or destructive. But it loosened up to the point. It loosened me up to a point where I didn't feel like I absolutely had to have an answer to everything. I mean, that started with Socrates. You know, why is this as Socrates put it? Why is this as he who knows he doesn't know? And that was the beginning of okay, I don't have to know. Maybe that's a wise thing to do. But Descartes pushed back against this sort of idea and sort of saying, but there are these things we can know. And then Hume came back and went, well, not so fast, you know. But then where philosophical skepticism and the skeptic that epistemologists try to argue against most of the time, there may not actually be any genuine skeptics to that level who, or if there are, they're not around for very long. But it's an interesting position to try and push back against, because their arguments are sound. Those arguments. So you want to argue against steel man. The straw man argument is where you pick really a caricature of a position or a person, and you draw the argument, and the argument is really it's a straw man. It's not a real man, and you argue against the straw man and go, see, I've won. But I've heard people say that they want to argue against the steel man, not the straw man. But if you look at the arguments that are presented in favour of philosophical skepticism, yes, I think that those arguments are pretty convincing. But you could go to nihilism and a negative sort of way of living and give up on everything and say, well, I don't know, and there's no point. But I just didn't see that was useful or helpful to me or to anyone around me. And Hume it's reversed. Hume by talking, and he seemed like Hume seems like he was a very pleasant sort of a guy, good company. He even says so himself in My Life, which he wrote just as he was getting, knew he was fatally ill. And so he wrote his own little epitaph, and he said, oh yeah, I was a nice bloke to be around, and I think I was pretty good company. I don't get arguments against that. But he acknowledged the strength of all of the arguments put forward for doubt. But at the end, he basically said, but where does that get you? Why should we buy that? And just said, well, let's just get on with it. Let's just live and make make plans and make decisions and try to live a worthy life, even though we don't know. And that was a massive relief to me, and I think that I got a lot more relaxed in myself at that point. And it allowed me to move on. It allowed me to do things that I thought were worth doing without having this constant pull of, well, why would you bother, and you can't know. Now, that'll probably do it for this one, but again, fascinating to bump into ChatGPT in that way. And so I had to remake this. The next one I'll do, really Locke and Berkeley would be appropriate people to look at alongside of Hume, but Hume was the one that really impacted me. Berkeley I find deeply fascinating, but really more in an intellectual way, really fascinating thinker. But I'll come back to Berkeley when I've sort of followed the thread that I'm on. And so in that light, it'll be Kant that I do next. But anyway, that'll do for this one. And see you next time. Well, not see you next time because I can't see you. Bye.